Tonight, the Prime Minister says terrorism has changed and the country faces a new threat. As a series of missed opportunities to stop the Southport killer emerge, Keir Starmer says it must be a line in the sand for Britain. I'll be joined by the Security Minister, Dan Jarvis, to ask if this really will be a watershed moment. Also tonight, more executive orders are expected later on, Donald Trump's first full day back in office, as those who took part in the January 6th riots are released from prison. Meanwhile, ahead of Rachel Reeves's trip to meet business leaders at Davos, the government gets rid of the chair of the UK's competition regulator. And is there a babysitter shortage in Washington? We'll talk political kids after a lot of them have appeared on stage in the US over the last few days. All that and more with Andrew Mitchell and Helena Kennedy, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. 3 little girls at a Taylor Swift dance class, stabbed to death. I mean, what happened to them is simply unbearable. It's too awful to comprehend. It's the kind of crime that makes you question the world. You know, how can that happen? How can another human being do that to those 3 little girls? Are they human? How can they be? Well, today we're learning more about the man who did it, Axel Rudakabana. And we're also learning that this could have been prevented. There were calls to police. The school flagged his behaviour. He was referred to Prevent 3 times and they decided against intervention. You know, Prevent, the guys whose job it is to stop terrorism. You know, this is not one of those cases where everyone is really shocked and can't believe that this person could have done this. There were multiple red flags, multiple reports, multiple agencies involved who could all pass the buck onto someone else. You know, in other words, there were multiple chances of stopping this attack from happening. And really, that just breaks your heart. Well, with a roundup now of what the Prime Minister had to say and what we've learned about this case, our first report is from Sky's national correspondent, Tom Parmenter.
The authorities knew he was dangerous. They knew he'd attacked people before and was obsessed with violence. But still, Axel Rudakabana was free to murder and maim last July, taking the lives of Bibi, Elsie and Alice.
We must make sure the names of those 3 young girls are not associated with the vile perpetrator, but instead with a fundamental change in how Britain protects its citizens and its children. Terrorism has changed. In the past, the predominant threat was highly organised groups with clear political intent. But now, alongside that, we also see acts of extreme violence perpetrated by loners, misfits, young men in their bedroom, accessing all manner of material online, desperate for notoriety, sometimes inspired by traditional terrorist groups, but fixated on that extreme violence, seemingly for its own sake.
Rudakabana's warped fascination with warfare, genocide and terrorism was cultivated online at home in the West Lancashire village where he lived with his parents. Aged 13, he was excluded from his school in Formby for carrying a knife. 3 months later, he returned to Range High and attacked people with a hockey stick. Dylan's daughter witnessed it.
Dad does, the conversation with this kid Axel. He said he was in range. Did you know he was? And it was, it was actually almost word for word. Oh, yeah, he was a nutter. He tried to attack someone outside my maths class with a hockey stick. He had a kill list. And I was very, taken aback. It sounds like it was a tragedy waiting to happen. How's he fallen through the cracks? And that's what people want to know.
That first incident with the knife in school happened in October 2019. The hockey stick attack followed 3 months later, when he broke a fellow student's arm. That was when he was first referred to Prevent, but he was judged not to meet the threshold for further intervention. He then sporadically attended 2 different special schools, where again, teachers were concerned about his behaviour. And in 2021, he was referred twice more to Prevent, but his case wasn't escalated. While the police say they couldn't find a specific terrorist ideology, Rudakabana was a clear threat, known to multiple authorities and free to buy his knives online, something the Home Secretary has described as a total disgrace. She has promised far stronger interventions. Not just from counter-terrorism police, but from everyone who had him on their radar.
We need to examine closely who spoke to whom about this youngster and why they didn't speak to one another and take appropriate action. And I think this case calls for a re-examination of, as it were, our national conscience as to what should comprise terrorism and how it should be dealt with.
Rudakabana will be sentenced on Thursday. His case may come to redefine terrorism in this country, but nothing will change the unbearable pain of those he attacked. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Southport.
Tom Parmenter reporting there. Well, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is here with us now. And John, it's just so painful, isn't it, watching reports like that? But in Westminster, they're wrestling with how to deal with this and how to try and draw a line in the sand, as Keir Starmer said.
After the PM did his statement and news conference this morning, this afternoon in the House of Commons there was a statement from Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary. She faced questions from MPs for an hour or so. And the criticisms from MPs, basically, for the three, basically. One, the cover-up allegations, led by Nigel Farage, who claims there's been a gigantic cover-up. He said a few weeks ago, if the government didn't hold an inquiry by the end of this month, he would pay for it. Well, that is going to happen, but, of course, it might not have done, of course, had the trial gone ahead. Secondly, of course, the criticism of Prevent, clearly shambolic, and as Lord Carlisle was saying in Tom's report there, all the various agencies clearly were not talking to each other. Whatever happened to joined-up government? I mean, the Prime Minister talked about how the state had failed these little girls. But, of course, Chris Philp, who is the Shadow Home Secretary, he was arguing that if the ricin possession was known about, was revealed publicly in October, why couldn't it have been revealed in August? Now, Yvette Cooper admitted that ministers knew in August. She and the PM, of course, stressed very strongly you can't prejudice a trial. If that trial had been collapsed, he would have walked free. The third criticism came from Sir David Davis, the veteran, I hope you won't mind me calling him that, Conservative MP, who challenged what the Prime Minister said at his news conference about there being a new form of terrorism. Loners, the PM said. He was talking about how previously we got used to Al-Qaeda and other groups being highly organised and so on. Loners, that's new, he said. Well, David Davis said, no, that's not right, because, of course, he mentioned the killing of Keith Palmer, the policeman at Westminster a few years back. He mentioned the murder of Sir David Amos a few years ago as well. He could also have mentioned Joe Cox. They were all loners, so loners aren't particularly new. But clearly, we're going to learn more on Thursday. The Home Secretary said when the sentencing happens. But this idea of a cover-up, clearly the opposition parties are going to keep hammering away at that. And also the criticism of Prevent, which was clearly a shambles, wasn't it? The Home Secretary's announced that David Anderson, a former terrorism assessor, has basically been put in charge to bang heads together. So the Prime Minister used the phrase, a line in the sand. Could it be, I think Tom said, a watershed? Could it be a turning point here after this dreadful case? Obviously, everyone will hope so, but you never know. I mean, this sort of thing could happen again. It's dreadful, it's awful, but we learned quite a lot today, but not enough, according to some of the government's critics.
Interesting stuff. John, thank you very much indeed. John Craig there, our chief political correspondent. Well, today I spoke to the former chief economist of the Bank of England, now chief executive of the Royal Society of Arts, Andy Haldane. He's worked with ministers on levelling up, focusing on the importance of social capital and community cohesion. Now, the full interview, focusing on the economy as well, will be shown tomorrow at 7. But I just want to show you what he had to say about the Southport murders and also, of course, the riots that did follow them. This year we talked about Southport, obviously. We've also talked about the grooming gang scandal that people feel very angry about still. So do you feel that there is a justified anger, I guess, towards the establishment in the initial response to these things?
Yes, there's definitely anger. I think it's to a degree justified because there has been a degree of willful blindness, Sophie, to some of those simmering tensions for a long time.
What do you mean by willful blindness?
Well, I think sometimes it's been difficult to question the cause of multiculturalism without being accused of somehow being racist or xenophobic. And for all that, multicultural communities bring great richness of ideas and cultures and practices. Unless you invest in the cohesion of those communities, you get the sort of things we see in Southport and across more than 30 places across the UK right now. We structurally underinvested in what's sometimes called the social capital of society, those bonds of trust and cohesion within our communities. Unless and until we start investing in those things, we're papering over the cracks.
You say that the policy response has been inadequate. Do you include the current government in that? The Labour government?
Yes. I mean, there's no long-term strategy as yet of helping bring those communities back together again. I mean, the simple, I would say simplistic response would be to close the door on immigration, stop the clock, turn back the clock, perhaps. For me, a better and more enlightened long-term response will be to build much stronger bridges of trust across the UK.
Yeah. Andy Haldane there. Well, we also spoke about Donald Trump and Rachel Reeves' plans for growth. The full interview will be available tomorrow at 7 p.m. on the Politics Hub. Well, I put Andy Haldane's comments to the Home Office Minister, Dan Jarvis. I also asked him if the Southport murders could have been prevented. Thank you so much for being on the programme tonight. Sure. You're obviously launching a public inquiry into Southport. It's just the most horrific story. I think we all feel quite scarred from it. I certainly do. I still find it very difficult to think about the reality of what happened. And there are obviously multiple failures from the state, which is also quite hard to deal with. Yes. Could this have been prevented?
Yeah. I think the first thing to say at the heart of this vile act is that we've lost 3 young girls, and my heart grieves for them and their families. I can't really imagine how difficult it must be for them and all of the people who were caught up in this vile act. And of course, the fact that there are very significant concerns about the processes that led to this perpetrator being able to do what he did must make it even more difficult. And that's why the Prime Minister, Home Secretary have announced a public inquiry. We think that that is the right thing to do, given the very significant concerns that rightly have been expressed. And a public inquiry is, I think, the right mechanism to look very carefully, not just at what's happened here, but more broadly. There's a particularly worrying and emerging threat of young men, boys, who are fueling a fascination of violence by activity online. And we've got to look very carefully at what more we can do to prevent further attacks like this from happening. And I think a public inquiry will help us in doing that.
Yeah, I'm keen to kind of unpick that, what you touched about there, about the kind of radicalisation of lone wolves, if you like, as well. But there were so many red flags, whether it's, the boy's family calling the police to the house, whether it's schools raising problems, whether it is the 3 prevent referrals that weren't ignored. I mean, what is going on here? That system is not fit for purpose, is it?
So that system has failed in this case in a completely unacceptable way. There were multiple failures, we know, and that's why we are absolutely determined to get to the bottom of precisely what has happened and make sure that it can't happen again. This isn't just about the PREVENT programme. The PREVENT programme is a part of this, but there are other failures in other areas of public life. This vile perpetrator had a number of individual sort of touch points with different bits of the system. So opportunities were missed.
I mean, one of them that I can't stop thinking about is social work. And, not just talking about this case, but if you're also talking about the girls who were abandoned and left to fall into the hands of grooming gangs, if you're talking about the young children who are abused by their parents, a lot of this seems to come down to social work. And I had to look at the statistics today. There's currently a critical lack of social workers. 19% of jobs are unfilled, the second highest level on record. I mean, do you need to pay social workers more and sort that out?
Well, let's see where we get to with the public inquiry. But you're right, there are very significant pressures on public services, in part because there has been very considerable underfunding of public services over a number of years. But we need to look carefully at the different areas of failure in this particular case and in others, and ensure that we have got appropriate levels of resource, both in terms of the PREVENT programme, but in terms of the wider social service network that sits around it.
Some people feel pretty angry. They feel that there's been a cover-up, rightly or wrongly. They think, look at all of these failures of the state, and everyone's trying to cover their backs effectively. And the question I guess I want to ask you in your role is why this wasn't immediately designated as terrorism. You had an academic study of Al-Qaeda. He had homemade ricin. He was referred to the PREVENT programme 3 times. He killed 3 little girls at a Taylor Swift dance class. Why wasn't it immediately designated as terrorism?
Well, I completely understand why people are angry. The Home Secretary and I are furious that this has been able to happen. But the worst of all worlds would have been if this vile perpetrator had not been brought to justice. And as government ministers, we have to be incredibly careful about what we say and what we do, because there is a risk.
That's a separate argument. Designating something as terrorism is a separate argument, isn't it? I mean, there's precedent for doing that with Joe Cox, for example.
Well, first, these are operational judgments for the police and then for the CPS. As ministers, with ongoing proceedings, we had to be extremely careful not to prejudice those ongoing proceedings. The worst of all worlds is if we'd said or done anything that left us in contempt of court that might have allowed the vile perpetrator to get away with these heinous acts. If we had done that, we would rightly never have been forgiven. And it is, I think, frankly, quite irresponsible that some people chose to play politics with this. They must have known and understood, certainly we explained it to them, that there were very strict legal limitations about what we could say.
Who are you talking about there?
Well, there were certain politicians who sought to, and I'm not going to name them because I think that wouldn't be appropriate. But
why wouldn't it be appropriate?
Well,
don't you think if you're making an accusation, you should be direct about who you're talking about?
Well,
what are you talking about?
My style and the way that I do my politics is to rise above these kind of attacks. But there were people who behaved in a way that I think was reckless and irresponsible. They knew that we weren't able to give a running commentary on events. They knew that these were judgments that were made operationally by the police and the CPS. They must have understood that we ran the risk of subverting legal proceedings, which could have left us in contempt of court.
Who are you talking about?
Well, there were politicians and there were commentators, and certainly there was a lot of commentary online that made allegations about the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary and myself that we were seeking to cover matters up. That is completely untrue, totally unfounded. We did everything that we possibly could to try and make sure that the police had the resources to conduct the investigation, but we were not able, rightly, for legal reasons, to give a running commentary on the process.
Do you think that reckless behaviour, in your words, helped to fuel the riots?
Well, I think that people have to take responsibility for their actions, and words have consequences. The Prime Minister, the Home Secretary and I, we did the right thing. We made sure that the resources were in place, and we were incredibly careful to ensure that we did not land ourselves in contempt of court. Now, I think it is right also to say, and Jonathan Hall has made some very acute observations, I think, about whether we need other mechanisms that in circumstances such as this, more information can be made available to the public. And we do need to look at that.
This is the genuine thing, right? Because we have a situation where something horrific has happened and people want to know about what has happened, understandably, because it's so awful. The Prime Minister knows the truth of the case, but he can't say it. The police know the truth, they can't say it. Some journalists know the truth, they can't say it. And yet other people can put out untruths. I mean, it feels like a madness. Do we not need to look at how to get correct information out there?
Absolutely. We do, and we are.
So why isn't the Prime Minister talking about that today, then?
Well, I think the Prime Minister did, to be fair, the Prime Minister did specifically mention that. I think clearly we had to ensure that under the legal framework that we operate, we didn't say or do anything that might have led us to be in contempt of court. But Jonathan Hall, the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, I think has made some helpful observations that under circumstances such as this, there does need to be a mechanism whereby more information could be put into the public domain. I think he's right about that. I think that is a very fair and reasonable critique of the situation that we found ourselves in. And that is why the government, working with the Attorney General, the Law Commission, will look very carefully at what more we could do should we find ourselves, heaven forbid that we don't, but should we find ourselves in a similar situation in the future.
Keir Starmer said today we must ask questions that must be far-reaching and unburdened by cultural sensitivities. What kind of cultural sensitivities does he mean?
Well, I think we will always need to make sure that we get to the truth without fear or favour. And I don't think that we, as ministers, have, frankly, any kind of cultural sensitivities around these kind of issues. We just want to make sure that the framework is in place to keep the public safe. Where that falls short, we need to look very carefully, and we will, at why it did, and make recommendations about how we can do things more effectively in the
It sounds like
future.
he's saying that he believes that in some cases questions are being asked burdened by cultural sensitivities.
Well, there is no room for cultural sensitivities.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it was your question to me about
but I'm just asking what, because I'm using the words that Keir Starmer said, cultural sensitivities. I'm asking you what that is.
Well, I don't know, in the sense that I'm completely agnostic to any of that. I'm not interested in the kind of the cultural background of the offender. All I'm interested in is keeping the public safe. I don't care where they've come from. What I'm interested in is how we can prevent people from conducting the kind of attacks that we saw in Southport. And it doesn't matter to me what their background is or what they're about. I just want to make sure that we've got the framework, the procedures, the resources in place to prevent that from happening.
I guess the question is, do you think that the institutions of the UK are culturally blind, or do you think they treat some cultures and some backgrounds differently to others?
Well, I think that is a very reasonable question for the public inquiry. I think the public inquiry provides an opportunity to look at these kind of issues. But the government will be very clear. We are not going to be swayed by cultural sensitivities. All I'm interested in as the National Security Minister is making sure the police and all of our operational partners have the resources they need to do what is a very difficult job. Let's not pretend any of this is easy. The nature of the threat that increasingly we face here in the UK and elsewhere is complex and changing. And it's the job of government ministers and of the government to make sure that our partners and that the police have got the resources. And we will be unstinting in terms of making sure that they've got the resources they need to do that most important job.
Now, of course, we've touched upon it, but the awful incident, the deaths of these 3 little girls, sparked riots over the summer in more than 30 different places. And I spoke to Andy Haldane today, the head of the Royal Society of Arts, and he spoke about a sense of discontent, distrust and a questioning of multiculturalism. And he said the immediate response has done nothing to heal those societal wounds. There's been a willful blindness because sometimes it's been difficult to question the cause of multiculturalism without being accused of somehow being racist or xenophobic. Do you agree with that?
I think it's an interesting point of debate. I think it's entirely reasonable and acceptable to express concerns about the nature of our society. That is part of our democracy. And of course, people can and should be able to express those concerns and have their debate. It is completely unacceptable to start throwing bricks at the police. And nobody can offer any kind of excuse for the kind of vile, criminal public disorder we saw in the aftermath of this terrible incident in Southport. So, yes, let's have an important, critical debate about the nature of our society. Let's think about what we can do to invest in communities and ensure that multiculturalism, or however you want to define it, works in the best interests of our country. Let's have that debate, but let's not go around throwing rocks and stones at police. That is completely unacceptable.
OK, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Security Minister Dan Jarvis there. You are watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, listening to that are our guests this evening, the former Conservative Cabinet Minister Andrew Mitchell and the Labour peer and barrister Baroness Helena Kennedy. We'll get their reaction. That's next.
Once almost lost, these denizens of the deep are back.
The problem for these whales is global warming. Water temperatures are rising.
We're worried that the animals are actually starting to starve.
Deadly and outdated. What do you think should happen to the nets?
I would like to see them go.
I'm Nicole Johnston, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Beijing.
A towering monument to the China dream and its demise.
From one end of this country to the other, China is littered with real estate that's falling apart.
China is facing a tsunami of the elderly.
We have to work as long as health allows, otherwise, no money.
China is under pressure to pay for the pensions of 500 million retirees. I've reported on a wide range of stories from around the world.
Mass protests forced the president to flee.
The sight of the president's private swimming pool only reinforces to Sri Lankans the great divide here between rich and poor.
Aid groups say Gaza is now the world's most dangerous place to be a child.
The Israeli army has raided towns and villages all over the West Bank. These tunnels run all over Gaza. The Gaza Strip is ridden with them.
A referendum designed to unite the country has only deepened its divide.
Sydney's floodplains underwater again.
This is the third or fourth time in 18 months that their homes have gone under.
Sky News, the full story first.
It may seem like a gimmicky toy, but it is part of the global race between the United States and China for new technology. This elite engineering designed to humour and to help us.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Welcome back. We're staying with the failure to prevent the Southport murders. We can bring in our duo for the evening, the former Conservative Cabinet Minister Andrew Mitchell and the Labour peer and barrister Baroness Helena Kennedy. Great to have you both here. It's something I always kind of slightly grapple with these cases, because you never want to take away from the fact that it is the individual who did this, who committed these murders, and he is the person we should be focusing on. But obviously, it is also right that we look at what the role of the state is, if anything could have been done to stop this from happening, any lessons that we can learn. And I have to say, in this case, it feels like there is sadly were opportunities. I don't know if you...
Well, I mean, I've spent my professional life, certainly until I started doing international work, I spent my life in the criminal courts. And the shocking thing about this case, and like... I mean, I think like everyone, I feel gutted when I hear that and I think about the details and think about it in relation to my own grandchildren of the same sort of age, little girls. But there is that awful business, which is that the system where the state takes on the business of having to prosecute someone and give someone a trial that conforms to the fairness standards and so on, means that you cannot put too much information into the public domain that may reach the ears of potential jurors who might then come thinking, well, the police must have known a ton of things about him. The police had missed out on this sort of thing, and why wasn't it? And so that sort of speculation, it becomes problematic. And remember that this was a case where from the very beginning, there was social media coverage suggesting that the offender who was arrested was somebody who'd come across the channel on a boat, which wasn't true at all. So there's speculation anyway, which goes into the jury room. And as it's turned out, this man has now pleaded guilty. But had there been a trial, and we all thought there was going to be a trial, then people like the Prime Minister have to be very cautious about anything they might say.
Andrew, what's your take on this? Because, we have seen politicians from the Conservative Party and also Reform saying, look, there was kind of misleading information or there was a lack of information that the government could have put out there that would have been helpful. And that's fuelled this belief that there's been a cover-up. What's your own take on it?
Well, I think that all of us who've watched this, and as Helena said, if you've got children or grandchildren, are absolutely heartbroken for the families involved in these terrible deaths. And I think that the government is absolutely right to have a proper, full-blown inquiry, and it really must be a no-holds-barred inquiry. And I do think there's a danger that if you, with social media and so forth, if you don't put information out, that vacuum will be filled. And I think that's a challenge to all of us. I think also that the important point about the inquiry is we need to know in detail about the state failure that clearly took place. And also, people must be held to account for running the system properly. If the system, if it failed because of the failure of people to take the right actions, and if there's a systemic failure, that too must be watched with great care. But what we've got to try and ensure, as I think the Security Minister, Dan Jarvis, said, is that nothing like this happens again, if we possibly can. And the one point I didn't agree with what Keir Starmer said this morning is this idea that the lone wolf, the individual radicalised in their bedroom, is now a new feature of the work of the security services. It isn't a new feature. It's been like that for a long time.
No. I think that what we're hearing from the Prime Minister is something based on intelligence, which is that yes, of course, there have been instances of what were called clean skins or lone wolves. There have been those different manifestations, but that we're seeing, and the intelligence that the police are receiving, is that there's much more of that going on. And their intelligence tells them about that, because then people speak about it at school and so on, and they realise that people are doing a lot of this stuff online. And I think
the point I'm making is I don't think that is true. I think that over my time in government, I think this is not a new phenomenon and has been, something the security service had to grapple with now for quite a number of years.
But what he was saying was that it has changed, and I think he's meaning in the numbers of people who are involved in this sort of being alone and being in your bedroom and finding out about sarin and finding out how to make things and how to do things. But I do want to say something that I feel is quite shocking about it, is that this young man was, as we've heard, involved in a number of instances of violence where, he was attacking someone with a hockey stick and broke somebody's arm. And no action was taken. That he turned up at school with a knife, and we've got an epidemic of knife crime. I mean, and this has been in the last few years. We're talking about. I just feel that there's something wrong, that those things were passed over as being sort of part of the norm, and that is alarming. Even if you separate it from the terrorism and the failure of the particular oversight that we're supposed to have in relation to terrorism, but even just on that, the other businesses.
And even if these reports that there were police calls to the family home, so it may be this is a family who is crying out for help. They don't know what to do, and there must be some kind of support.
I strongly agree with what Helena has said. And I think that's why it's so important that the inquiry focuses on state failure. What were the causes of it? And holds people to account. And I agree that the litany of dreadful things this fellow did, and it not ringing a whole series of alarm bells is quite extraordinary.
But, I mean, he was expelled from the school, and so and presumably an assumption was being made that he was being punished for that. But the story that his father had to stop him only a week or so before this incident, stop him going to his old school in a way that was indicating that he was going to do something deeply violent then, and his father stopped him. The concern one has is, I mean, I had assumed that this was going to be fought on the basis that he was schizophrenic, or that there was something deeply mentally unwell about this young man. And it may be that is the case, but the circumstances that might in itself have been the thing that made people more accepting of horrific behaviour is itself worrying. Why were mental health authorities not involved here?
Thank you both very much indeed. Such a Such an awful story. It really breaks your heart, doesn't it? Thank you. And of course, the Southport murders and that public inquiry will feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the PR consultant Alex Dean. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. World leaders and world-famous footballers have jetted off to Davos this week, plus Rachel Reeves there to drum up support for the UK economy. Find out how she's getting on next. Plus later in the programme with JD Vance and Donald Trump Jr. bringing their kids into the inauguration, we're looking at the political power of showing off your spawn and some of the risks involved. Hello, welcome back. Well, the great and the good have hit the snowy slopes of Davos this week. Top of the agenda, looking large over proceedings, is of course Donald Trump. Now, there's no sign of his threatened tariffs yet, but how to respond to the new president is preoccupying minds at the summit, to say the least. And the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is also heading there with her plans to try and boost UK economic growth at the forefront of her mind. Well, let's go now to our business correspondent, Paul Calso, who is there. Paul, how are things in Davos? How are they reacting to Donald Trump?
Yeah, this gathering of the World Economic Forum, an annual meeting, 4,000 delegates, 50 heads of state and 150-odd CEOs and blue-chip chairs of big companies among them. It's the place, Sophie, that likes to think it has answers. It tries to fix the world's problems, believes that the sort of liberal economic order can not only make profits, but it can also fix the problems of the world. Well, they haven't really got answers to Donald Trump today. I think in part because they still don't really know what the right question to ask is. There's a lot of thought that Donald Trump might, in that rush of executive orders, might include some swingeing tariffs that applied around the world. Well, that didn't materialise. He's promised vaguely to tax and tariff competitor nations, but that's slightly left certainly the political class here scrambling a bit for the right response. We've heard from Olaf Scholz, the outgoing German Chancellor today, also Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission. She is going to be imposed to have to deal with the second Trump term, and in her address she conceded that the liberal economic consensus is broken. We're in a new era of pretty stiff global competition, but she insisted it wouldn't be at the expense of European values.
A lot is at stake for both sides. So, our first priority will be to engage early, discuss common interests, and be ready to negotiate. We will be pragmatic, but we will always stand by our principles. We will protect our interests.
That sounds like quite a stock European response to Donald Trump, and I'm not sure Donald Trump is going to stop and consider his values because his values are making the best deal possible for America these days. Global cooperation doesn't look like it's top of the list. Now, of course, this may all be positioning, but the fact European leaders are having to think about resetting relations with the biggest economy in the world and the biggest single trading partner tells you how disruptive Trump is going to be economically. Business leaders here, slightly depends which sector they're in, but there are a few I've spoken to who think the rhetoric is going to be worse than the reality. Spoke to one big renewables operator. They make wind turbines, big Danish company, Vestas. He said he listened to all of it yesterday. America's his biggest market, and he said he slept very soundly. He thinks providing energy, even if it does come from renewables, will be welcome in America. One little line, you mentioned Rachel Reeves. She's arrived in Davos now. She's with Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, this evening. He's taken a decision that's intended to reinforce this message that Britain really is interested in growth. They've effectively sacked the chairman of the Competition and Markets Authority. Might sound like quite a dry subject, but the CMA oversees takeovers in the UK. It's been heavily criticised recently. One case, Microsoft was trying to buy a big successful British gaming company. It took much longer than Microsoft would have liked. It was eventually approved. The messaging is from government. The chairman, as was of the CMA, was not sufficiently getting the message that growth is the priority now. And they believe this will send a message when Rachel Reeves meets investors tomorrow that they're not just interested in growth, they're serious about it and they're serious in encouraging investment. And they won't unnecessarily get in the way of those investors should they choose to put their money in Britain.
OK, thank you very much, Paul Calsay there. Well, they're all talking about him at Davos. Let's find out how he's going down in Washington. What's Donald Trump been getting on with today? We can talk to Mark Stone, our US correspondent. Mark.
Hi, Sophie. Well, first of all, those gathered in Davos may get a clearer idea of Donald Trump's intentions globally when he beams in to Davos on Thursday, 11 o'clock, a virtual appearance by the new president. So maybe a little more detail on things like tariffs, on his view of a world which is rather different from the world that those gathered at Davos see. Multilateralism, perhaps not so much a thing under President Donald Trump. I was struck listening to Ursula von der Leyen there, the President of the European Commission. What's interesting is that alliances have kind of been severed overnight. I know, for example, that Joe Biden and Ursula von der Leyen had a good relationship. Joe Biden respected von der Leyen as the president of the European Commission. They had a clear relationship. That is not the case with von der Leyen and Donald Trump. And it is also the case that embassies right around the world now are as quickly as they can, trying to establish meetings with key officials in the White House. I was just down there a little earlier on, and we ran into the Australian Foreign Minister, who was here with her ambassador. In fact, he is Kevin Rudd, the former Australian Prime Minister, now the Australian ambassador to the US. He was with his foreign minister, and they were in the Oval Office. They met with Mike Walls, the new national security advisor. So for the Australians there, an important moment, an important meeting, an excellent meeting, she told me that it was. He is due to make more announcements today. We expect something on AI this afternoon. There will be some sort of a news conference or a statement from the president. As always, we never quite know what form it will take. But the other thing that he did this morning, in keeping with tradition, he went to Washington National Cathedral up in the northwest of the city, where he attended a service. And have a look at what he was told by the bishop in the cathedral. Have a listen to this, the sermon directed directly at Donald Trump.
The vast majority of immigrants are not criminals. They pay taxes and are good neighbors. They are faithful members of our churches and mosques, synagogues, wadara, and temples. I ask you to have mercy, Mr. President, on those in our communities whose children fear that their parents will be taken away, and that you help those who are fleeing war zones and persecution in their own lands to find compassion and welcome here.
Now, quite apart from what she is saying, take a look at the reaction of Donald Trump and indeed his family and his team around as she was speaking. They looked distinctly uncomfortable. It's hard to know which of them to concentrate on. Is it Eric behind Donald Trump, who shakes his head? Is it the vice president there turning to his wife at one point? Is it Tiffany Trump behind? All of them look distinctly uncomfortable at this sermon, quite literally, that the bishop gave to the president.
Yeah, quite something. Mark, thank you very much indeed. Mark Stone, there for us from Washington. All right, let's bring in Andrew and Helena, shall we? Andrew, what do you think we can expect from Donald Trump 2.0?
Well, I think he will be a more sophisticated version of Donald Trump 1.0 because he's had the experience beforehand. And he's clearly thought about it. I mean, I think it's a complete new world, actually. I think that, you know, liberal, centrist, wishy-washy politicians like me and Helena we've lost the argument. And I think migration is
no,
quite...
we haven't.
I think migration is quite important in that. You know, the public see that we fail to stop the people coming across in the boats, and other failures too. And, of course, the new Labour government is discovering how difficult it is to govern. And the thing is that populists, they don't solve problems, they amplify them. And the job of the Tory party in opposition, obviously the government, the Labour Party in government, is to come up with the right policies that will resolve these problems, and then people will return from the populists to supporters. But I do think that he won clearly. He won with the votes of a lot of the poorest people in America. There does seem to be a massive sea change, and the impact of that on Europe and on the G7 will be very great indeed, I think.
I loved your reaction, by the way, that the wishy-washy Liberal centre hasn't lost the argument in your view, then?
Well, listen, of course...
She's much less wishy-washy than me.
Of course, I see that Donald Trump is auguring a sort of, he wants to create a new world order, and that is tough because we've put together, I think, a set of values that are shared, we thought were shared, and I think he is tearing up the rule book, and I think it's going to be a rocky ride. I loved the vicar. I mean, she is going to be one of the icons of our time because she actually confronted him on day 2 and said that so many immigrants... I mean, the United States has built on immigration. And the idea that he would break with the Constitution, which says that a child born in America is an American. I mean, people went there to give birth in order that their children would be American. And the idea that he's going to try and deny that is breaking. I mean, there's going to be a lot of work for lawyers on a lot of the things that he's talking about.
That's interesting.
And I can tell you this: a lot of the things that he is highlighting can't be, will be challenged through the courts. But what can't be challenged are his forgiveness of the 600 odd folk who took part in the June the 6th violent attack on Washington.
Andrew, I'm interested to, if you kind of get your crystal ball out, like, how do you think Donald Trump is going to treat the UK? Because it feels like there's all sorts of speculation kind of going on that actually it's not going to be as bad as we think, or no, it's going to be really bad, it's going to be terrorists. You've got Elon Musk firing pot shots at Keir Starmer the whole time. What argument do you come down on?
Well, I think in the end, the harsh political reality is that Britain and America working together is stronger than either of the two parts, and that we do believe in the same sort of things by and large. And even in this new Trumpian era, we have clear national interest things that we both want to pursue that we can do together. So I think for Britain it will be a more comfortable experience than it will for continental Europe. And I think an awful lot will depend upon the reaction to Trump's insistence, which I think is right, about a massive increase in defence expenditure, and that America is not going to go on paying the bill for Europe. We have got to take responsibility for ourselves. I think Britain is in the right space for that, at least I hope we will be. But I think a lot of other countries that are part of NATO have had a free ride, and it's not going to happen in the future.
OK, we're out of time on that chat. Thank you both very much indeed. Still to come on the Politics Hub. The inauguration was crawling with mini-Trumps and mini-Vances, showing support for democracy. It's like tidying your room, kids. You just got to do it. We are looking at the power of political offspring. That's next.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, we'll take a look at the missed opportunities to stop the Southport murders. As it emerges, the killer was referred to an anti-terror programme 3 times, but was repeatedly not seen as a risk. I've been talking to a former head of that programme to find out why. Also ahead tonight, why the opening day of Prince Harry's case against the Sun's publisher is delayed. And the Staffordshire village cut off by 100 tonnes of fly-tipped rubbish. All that, much more, on the UK Tonight at 8.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
What's it like doing this kind of stuff when he's not here?
Yeah, I miss him. He just inspired me to be a better person. He's shown us what living looks like in the toughest and most difficult of circumstances.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over. People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks. I've reported from around the world and around the UK. It isn't what politicians see from election battle buses, but what ordinary people see from the buses that shape the timetable of their lives.
I feel like there's no trust between the people and the politicians.
Labour's going to get in definitely, and they're no better than the Conservatives.
It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next. Ida has certainly left its mark on New Orleans.
It just feels heartbreaking.
Cartels in Mexico are flooding America with the drug. We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. This gives you an idea of the strength of those winds, strong enough to bend and twist metal. Sky News, the full story first. Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque. That's a scene that you don't forget.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Very good morning to you all. Morning.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
There's no sign, publicly at least, of either side being willing to give ground. Brianna's dad told Sky News what he thinks of them.
If I'm honest, I hate them. They're just evil. They'll always be monsters.
Free wherever you get your news. How do you reassure the public that all of these mistakes wouldn't be made again?
God forbid we should have to do this again.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, we've all been there. You've got a huge day at work and there is a childcare emergency. Well, it's not a problem in Trump world because you can just treat it as a take your kids to work day because, hey, there is nothing kids love more than witnessing a peaceful transfer of power over several hours with no snacks or phones to play with, right? Love it. Let's bring in Helena and Andrew, shall we? I always feel a bit sorry for political kids, I have to say. I mean, it can't be much fun getting dragged along to all this stuff, right?
Oh, absolutely. And also knowing that if you put a foot wrong, you're not only going to bring down the press, but you're going to bring down the wrath of your parents as well.
Can you imagine? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I feel like it's, I mean, I guess it's about demonstrating family values. There is a kind of good political PR there as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I think also you do want to shield your children from the impact of politics if you can. And both my two daughters have very serious careers miles away from politics. In fact, on one occasion when my elder daughter did agree to give an interview and was asked by a political journalist whether she would follow her father and her grandfather into politics, she replied that she'd rather take a bullet.
Is that what she said? Yeah. I love that.
so I think there's
very well taught.
Little chance of her or her sister going into politics.
That's a great quote. I love that. I love that.
It's sort of building up of the dynasty, isn't it? I mean, because it was interesting when you saw interviews of people who travelled to Washington for this great day. And that was one of the things they talked about was, oh, isn't it wonderful seeing this whole family and all of that. And you do get a sense that he is sort of grooming his offspring to follow in his footsteps.
It's a bit like the royal family.
Yeah, right? He wants it to be like the Kennedys, you know, that it becomes the Trumps of...
There's a thought.
There's a thought, isn't it? But I suspect that that's one of the things that he has in his mind.
Yeah, you can see it. It does feel a real contrast, doesn't it, actually? Like the point you were making about shielding families between the British attitude and the American ones, very sort of different ones indeed.
But you see that Keir Starmer hasn't... We don't know what his children even look like.
That's absolutely right. Thanks both very much indeed. Great to have you on tonight's show. I'll see you tomorrow at 7. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee. She's, of course, focusing on some of those failures around the Southport murders.